Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome. And thank you all for joining us here on the playing field. Delighted to have so many of you tuning in and listening, and we're certainly delighted with the response and the turnout that we've had so far. So, as I mentioned in the confirmation email, I'm sure you all know the deal by now in terms of turning off cameras, also microphones. And again, just to assure everybody that this live recording is being recorded and will also be distributed to all of our registrations post-event. So as mentioned, we're really excited about this being one of our first live recordings. We've run a number of episodes now of the playing field over the last number of months and have put a particular focus on a lot of coaches in New Zealand that are working throughout the country. So this is our 8th episode of this current series, and we'll certainly be welcoming back one of our featured guests, which will be Mr. José Manuel Figueira. So just a couple of things to begin with to kind of give some context for the day, or sorry, for the hour. So as part of the registration, people were declaring what age group of players that they work with. So there was lots of junior coaches, there was lots of youth coaches, there were lots of football administrators, directors of football, and loads of different similar roles. And we actually had a massive variance in the type of people that are involved in the call today. So just I guess for clarification, this will very much be around senior coaching and a senior coaching journey that Jose's taken. But as I'm sure many of you all know, that there's always bits that you can take and adapt and apply into your environment. So it's very much a senior focus. What I'm going to encourage you all to do is to use the chat feature, which you should be familiar with on the right-hand side. And then what I'll do is I'll just keep an eye on those as Jose goes, and there'll be an opportunity to surmise those at the end of the recording. And the recording itself will be made available to you all within 24 hours of today. So by tomorrow night, you'll have a copy of this and you'll better go over and again, just reiterate some of the areas which Jose has spoken about. So to begin with, I just want to welcome back Jose Manuel Figueira. Jose is the current head coach and head of methodology at Auckland City. I'm sure many of you will know Jose from his various years in NZ now, along with national teams, Team Wellington, as well as various winter teams as well. So delighted to welcome Jose back. Jose's been on our episodes twice now, in 2 of the earlier episodes, and delighted to welcome back for a live recording today. So Jose, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, Stephen. Again, thanks for the invite, and hopefully everyone can hear me. Good to see some familiar names, both here in New Zealand or across social media, and people that I've connected with before. And yeah, obviously the situation that we find ourselves, although we're fingers crossed moving out of the COVID-19 scenario in New Zealand in the next couple of weeks. It's a great opportunity to share some of my ideas. I'm a big believer in sharing and transparency as a coach, and hopefully, as Stephen said at the top, regardless of the level or position that you're working in, that you'll find some elements of this really useful for yourself.
Excellent, thank you, Jose. And what I think is important for people to understand is maybe before you go into the presentation, as you kick off, can you just give us an indication as to how this presentation's developed, where you took some inspiration from, and how you've settled on obviously the presentation that you've kindly put together for us today?
Yeah, just quickly. So I presented parts of this presentation for what is Sport NZ. They run a performance coach advanced group. I'm an alumni of that group, having been on it 5 or 6 years ago now, and they asked me, due to the lockdown, obviously, as an opportunity to connect with coaches across all codes. I presented on these three topics, but I've made it a little bit more specific for the football context and the coaching world, for the playing field. So yeah, it was really born from that, and as I said just before, an opportunity to go into a little bit more detail in some of those areas for the coaching community.
Excellent. And yeah, just to reiterate our thanks and our appreciation ahead of that. So what Jose will do here, Jose will just share his screen. You should all be able to see that. And as mentioned, if you just continue to type away some of your questions on the chat box, I'll be sure just to be here in the background and answering those. And then post Jose, once he's finished talking, again, there'll be a chance for us to talk there. But otherwise, again, thank you all for tuning in, and thank you, Jose, for presenting this.
No problem. Steve, just checking you can see that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Okay, thanks again, guys. Obviously, as described, the presentation will run through what I feel have really come to the forefront of my mind around the cornerstones of my own coaching, my coaching journey. I do admit that probably each of these areas, the mind management and methodology, could be their own presentation and in their own right. So while I go into a little bit of detail in each of those areas from my own personal experiences, hopefully some of your questions will drive a little bit more information and digging a little bit deeper as I mentioned. So yeah, obviously mind management methodology, some three areas that I've looked to really invest in myself in the last couple of years, and as I touched on, as I've found myself working through my coaching journey, in New Zealand, having worked grassroots community, in the school landscape, with junior football, youth football, academy programs, moving through to that youth into the senior environment. I've found that these three areas have been massive for both my looking at the game, looking at myself, how I create my environment, and most importantly how I connect with my players and my team and my staff and everything like that. So I guess from the mind perspective, and even before stepping onto the pitch, whether that's going into a new team, a new season, a new program, a new opportunity. I went through a bit of a process on actually getting to myself before getting to know others, and I firmly believe that if I'm comfortable with who I am, I understand who I am as a person, that will give me the springboard and the stepping stone to be able to essentially be myself and help myself connect with those around me. And wanted to start with this great quote, Pep Linders, who's assistant coach at Liverpool, and I think it's quite a neat quote around you look at many teams, and I think right off the top of your head as you read that, you can imagine teams either that you've coached against, teams that you've seen, teams at the very top of the game, in the world's best leagues, that the character or the personality of the team is normally mirrored in the character of the coach. And obviously Pepin, who's involved at Liverpool, immediately your mind is drawn to Jurgen Klopp, and obviously that quote for me really resonates. For me personally, I'm always a believer of showing a lot of passion, passion for what I believe in, for developing players. I tend to be slightly more withdrawn during games, and tend to allow the players and the team themselves to have that sense of calmness and stillness on the pitch to, you know, go about their work. So I thought that quote was a good way to kind of, you know, kick off. And, you know, for me, as I said before, that process of getting to know myself and essentially, you know, being the best version of myself, you know, as a coach in the footballing context. And really that boils down to, you know, knowing what I'm like as a person, and, you know, having a good understanding of, you know, obviously the things that, you know, get me excited, the things that I, you know, enjoy, the way that I connect, you know, with my family, with my friends, but then also thinking about, you know, what I'm like as a coach. To some of those, you know, traits and values and behaviors, you know, resonate into my coaching style? Do I want them to? Do I want to have a different, you know, persona when I step on the football pitch? And you know, what values, those key values, you know, make me who I am. And, you know, personally, I've got very strong, you know, family values. It is the way that I've been raised by, you know, really loving and strong Spanish Mediterranean family, very close connections, and you know, really looking out for each other. And they're really, you know, some of the values as a person that I've brought up with, and something that I've, you know, I look to take in onto the pitch. You know, once I've, you know, thought about that, you know, thought about, you know, myself personally, you know, it's about now going through a process of, you know, how do I want my team, or more specifically my players, to, you know, act, to feel things, to look like on and off the pitch. And, you know, I'm a big believer that, you know, those behaviors, you know, resonate both from, you know, myself as a coach, or the staff, or the people around you, or your organization. And, you know, it's having really firm beliefs and behaviors around those areas of, you know, the way that, you know, I want my team to act and feel and look like, regardless of things are going well, things are going badly. So, you know, certainly something to look at. And as I touched on, you know, certainly in sport and in football, you know, you have to live with both, you know, the good times, the good decisions, the bad times, the bad decisions when things aren't going so well. Another really important question I asked myself was, you know, how do I want the players, the team, my staff, the people around me, you know, to see me in those moments, and how do I want to, you know, act? And I tend to, you know, look at that in a little bit of a spectrum. You know, at one end, you know, there's fear, there's obviously, you know, the players who are, you know, hanging on every word that you say. You're really driving, you know, the standards and what you expect, and being, you know, really almost, you know, dictatorial about the way that you know, you want things to be done. You know, at the other end of the scale, there's love. I'm sure you could use, you know, any number of words for that as well. And, you know, where the players kind of feel, you know, safe, they feel happy. You know, it's an environment where, you know, everything is very open. Or, you know, is there a balance of both? And I think certainly, you know, as a coach and for myself, you know, I do believe there, you know, needs to be an element of separation. It's not necessarily, you know, having the walls up and not being approachable. But, you know, I think it's really important that, you know, once you've, you know, shown who you are, and you've convinced the players of who you are and what your ideas are, you know, it's about, you know, really having that respect both for, you know, me as a coach for the players, but, you know, the players also having the respect for the coach and those around us. Obviously, everyone in New Zealand already knows, and for those that are joining us from other places, you know, New Zealand is very much, you know, an amateur football nation, and you know, teams that play in amateur football competitions. Obviously, bar one team in the Wellington Phoenix that plays in the Hyundai A League in Australia. But, you know, very much we're living in an amateur world. And, you know, I ask that question to myself every day, when, you know, I'm on the way to training, before I step on the pitch. And, about how I can really drive that professional mindset on the, on the pitch and in my environment. And Wayne Smith, who has been one of the key figures in the New Zealand All Blacks coaching setup, came up with this fantastic quote. And there's actually nothing stopping you from living the habits of the best in the world. You don't necessarily have to be the best, but there's certainly nothing stopping you from attempting to live those habits day in, day out. And in a football context for us, yes, while we might be living within the constraints of an amateur football competition and landscape, there's absolutely nothing stopping myself, the players, driving that into the players and having that culture that we can live the habits of the best of around the world. And lastly, for those that can resonate, as a person, coaching is only one part of life, as is your work or your job. And balancing the expectations, the needs of obviously being a husband, a father, a coach, and something that I've had the opportunity to do so and look at myself in recent times is taking a moment to breathe, to look at ways of finding a better balance between all three of those, if I want to call them roles, or three aspects of my life. And there's things that have really helped me, and especially during this lockdown period has been an opportunity to kind of revisit and re-look at those. Something that I've been interested in the last couple of years on a personal level, and it's something that we're now starting to drive as a team and as an organisation as well, is the values of being mindful and meditation. And I think there's still the guard is up a little bit when it comes to the football world anyway, when people think of meditation, but on a deeper level, and a lot of the findings that are out there now linking meditation, good habits, mindfulness, to higher levels of performance. That really resonated to for me as a coach. And one of the things I've started to do in the last couple of seasons, I own an Apple iWatch, as you can see there, is I started some of my own routines. So on a match day, I find myself being very much on the outskirts. The players are very much into their routines on a match day. Everyone prepares in a different way before they go out, and for me it's a really good opportunity to just calm myself, look at my breathing routine, and while the warm-up's happening, just kind of be in and around the background, to quiet my mind ahead of the game. Obviously there's a lot of things that happen once the game starts. There's a lot of roles within our staff, responsibilities for myself to make sure I'm capturing things in the game. And for me, it's absolutely crucial of having that clarity of thought of what lies ahead. So certainly that breathing, finding that stillness within me before a game starts has been something I've found very, very valuable for me. And if it's something that you've been interested or thinking about or wanting to look at, it's something that certainly I'll recommend. And another thing as well is just before kickoff, obviously traditionally, while the players are on the pitch and making their way out and just about getting ready, it's again grounding myself. It's having that sense of stillness, going through a routine of what are my senses feeling, what's the weather like, what's the pitch like under my feet, what are the sights and sounds around me, and really just kind of absorbing all of those elements to what it says just above, giving me that real clarity of thought, and before the game kicks off. Just to give a little bit more context of what being mindful is. Just a really short video clip, and essentially just keeping yourself in the moment. Obviously, as a coach, for me, talking on a personal level, but as I touched on, it's absolutely something that can add a huge amount of value on an individual basis for players and athletes as well. I understand that the video might be a little bit jumpy. It might be obviously just the connection with everyone on. So apologies. I'll make sure that Stephen shares that video with you. But hopefully, you're able to hear those messages, and some really key messages in there that resonate with myself, and obviously for the players, and that's living moment to moment. Going out on the pitch, leaving all of those other thoughts behind oneself, and with the aim of being your true authentic self when you're out on the pitch. So as a player, and thinking how I want to transmit those thoughts and feelings as a coach into the players, and really trying to tap into what being present is all about, and obviously as a coach, you're always wanting to drive the performance levels of the players, and getting them to perform as high level as possible. And really encouraging them that if they're present, if they're in the moment, they're living those habits, and as a coach, really allowing them to be their true authentic self on the pitch, and encouraging them to show their personality. And something that I talk about is present moment awareness, thinking moment to moment, that's action to action, really taking into account of the action that you're executing in that moment. And once you can reach that kind of level of thought into action, you really start to gain a state of flow, and as I said before, merging the sense of action with awareness. And if you've done some reading into the state of flow, and some of the feedback that athletes or top performing athletes have spoken about, they will find it difficult to either recount or relive or retell certain moments, or really talk about them in a lot of detail, and that's because that really kind of taps into that intuition and that instinct, and again merging the two of the action and awareness. And another thing, and it taps back into the environment that I want to create me as a person, as a coach, the kind of culture that we want to have in the team. And we spoke about a little bit around that. Is it a sense of, fear that the players are living in? Is it a sense of love? Is it respect? And, what's really important is, they have, as a player, when they turn up to training, when they're, in your environment, essentially they feel safe. And you can put that in any context in life. If you feel safe, you can be your best self, the best version of yourself. And as footballers, it really encourages them to be themselves skillfully, and show themselves skillfully on the pitch. Another fantastic quote, obviously, from the late great Kobe Bryant. And I draw this back to the context of the amount of times perhaps that you're able to work with your teams. As I said, we live in an amateur football landscape here, and the hunger here is to always work more with players, work with them every day. But the biggest thing that you can take out from that, to get across to the players is, can you as a coach get them in a place where their mind themselves are present during training, and whether you're training 4 to 5 times a week, whether you're together twice a week, can you get that sense of presence and connection from the players, that really drives the learning, and obviously the culture and the development. Again, if there's any questions around that, how I got into some of those areas and things, please add them onto the chat perspective at the end. Looking at management for me, and again, an area that I found myself as you progress, working through the youth junior space, and certainly moving into that top end youth space into seniors, that the management side of things become even more important. Getting to know not just the player and what their skills are, but getting to know them as people individually as something that I've invested in heavily over the last few years, and it's almost been a light bulb moment for me that in essence, if I want to get the best out of a player on the pitch, I need to understand each and every person in my team, in my group, as deeply as possible, to give me a good understanding of what gets them going. And for us, we've got players that will be either rushing from college or university, from jobs in an office that had a good day or a bad day. They've got other stresses going on, and trying to understand that as best as possible, that life interrupts with football, but getting to know the individual has been something that's really valuable. Again, if the video might be a little bit jumpy, hopefully we can hear the audio. But there's a few real key messages here. A short clip from Jurgen Klopp, around the sense of building relationships, and connections, and what's important for him as a head coach. Hey guys, sorry, I understand that it's a little bit jumpy again, so I will just go and play the raw audio to see if it will actually work. And I'll tell you what, I'll have to share that with Stephen at the end. So apologies for that if it's been a little bit difficult to listen to. So, in essence, what Jurgen Klopp speaks about there is, building those relationships that, football is just a small part of, their process, the way that they, want to live, the values and their behaviors that they live, day in, day out. And, something that I touched on earlier around, the character of the coach being, present as in the character of the team itself, and something that he says, that, the responsibility he has when he walks into a room about, setting the tone, setting the feeling of what that room is like. Was something quite neat that came out of that, and again, obviously resonates with the kind of culture that they have there. And the aim of anyone is, of any team, of any organization, is to have a real strong sense of culture. And if we look at the word culture itself, if we strip it right back, it's essentially the ideas, customs and social behavior of a particular people or society or group, and obviously in this context, being a football team or people. Something I've been interested in as a coach, and I've looked back and reflected, on the teams that I've worked with and how we've, established our, values and what we believe in. And, I look back at myself and think, are some of those values, already premeditated? Are they, driven by the coach? In the sense of, well, this is what I believe in. So, you as players or as a team, I think this is, what we should be, driving for as a unit. Values that are sometimes, nurtured by a club. And, you look at, again, could be examples of, some great clubs around the world. Your own organizations probably have, some core values, and, for sure those values that a club have, certainly can, nurture the values of the player and players individually within your team as well. But also, our values that you create within your team, or that you're looking to create within your culture, are they nurtured by the player? Is it something that evolves or needs to evolve? And bearing in mind that every person or every player is different. It's something that I've that's kind of really struck a chord with me around people's personalities and people's own beliefs, driving the culture and the environment that we're living in. It's the $1 million question. How do we create and live these ideas, these customs, these behaviors, and these values in our own environments? What do they look like? What do they feel like? Going back to that question I posed to myself, it's really getting down to understanding what these words, what these values, essentially what these behaviors are and look and feel like, within your environment on and off the pitch. This is something I'll just share with you a number of years ago, so it's not something that's present or connected with New Zealand football now, but this is something that was shared with us a number of years ago as age group coaches, and again, going back to sort of the questions that I thought about when it come to my own team, so the under 17 team, obviously a team within a wider player development program, that these words were obviously driven by the organisation and the coach at that point in time, and obviously words that I'm sure that we all connect with, and in our own minds as coaches have some ideas of what they look like. But for me, it was more about going through a process of, well, how can players be truly invested in, if we're using those words, how can we turn those words into true values, and essentially how can these values or these words become behaviors on the pitch, and allow them to be truly invested in your culture. And the point of difference that I found, and again was a little bit of a light bulb moment for me this year when I came around creating our culture at Auckland City. I went through a little bit of a different process, and someone who I work closely with from Sport New Zealand, Craig Lewis, introduced me two parts. Firstly, into what's called the results pathway. So to give a little bit of a wider context of what does culture, what does values, what does behaviours look like, and what do they mean. And then second part on how we create that, or we establish those as a group, which will be on the next slide. But essentially, behaviours produce results. Results add to our own experiences as individuals. Values obviously drive our behaviour, and beliefs form our values. And if we kind of look at that pathway from a person or an individual perspective, so the value of a personal value of a player drives the behavior of that person. What do they believe in as people in life drives their certain behavior on the pitch. That behavior, whether it be a positive one, a negative one that challenges, one that supports within the environment, will produce a result. The results add to our experiences as a wider group, and essentially those experiences that we all live as players, as coaches, as a team, as a culture, they really start to nurture our beliefs as a group. And this kind of results pathway gave me real good clarity around what drives values, what forms beliefs, what our behavior is born from, and what are some of those outcomes that lead to that. And something that again, as I mentioned, Craig introduced as part of this process, we don't so much look or call it a culture. We essentially talk about values, but values in action. And we went through a process of each individual players going through essentially what looks like a personal value questionnaire. It's a really good process that drives some really objective results around taking firstly the football context out of it, and as I touched on before, being able to kind of really connect individually with players and what they believe in. And once we got all of those responses back individually, we looked to see what were some of the common trends and threads throughout the team that we then used to bind our values. And what I found with going through this process of rather than a look in the past of, okay, well, let's get into groups, think of some words that we want to look like on the pitch, Okay, we'll put those up on posters, or in a changing room, or as I said before, even more premeditated, whereby some of my own beliefs is what this is what we're going to do. I believe in this. Now you as players, what does that mean for you? This values in action process is a really authentic way to create, as I said before, not necessarily a true culture, but those true values and, those beliefs that essentially are created and are lived by those that breathe it day in, day out, the players. And, if we go back to that results pathway before, we can see how that really starts to kind of tie in as you go through that process. Again, this process is really driven by the players excuse me, and allows both myself, my staff, to be able to kind of sit around the background and to really cultivate those values that have been born out of those process by the players, and obviously with the leadership group that's established, something that can be really organically driven by by our staff. What I found is it gives a real sense of purpose behind the behavior, and going back to that results pathway before, the behavior, those actions, and really putting meaning behind some of those words and personal beliefs of of the players. And what I found is those values have really led to results, and not results on the pitch, but results in terms of getting to know these people, these players on a totally different level, and understanding them, and what their values are as people, being able to take that into a context of when things are going well, when things aren't going so well, when we want to try new things, when we've got a certain direction we want to go in, all of a sudden I've got a really strong framework to kind of base some of those decisions on. And just as an example, and I'm sure Albert, one of our players, one of our senior players, won't mind me sharing this with you, but essentially, as I said before, after going through that process of the values in action questionnaire, we took the top 3 values from each of those players. We collated those. We found that there was a certain sense of connection, of some of the group, and a direction that we wanted to go in as a whole, but obviously not forgetting all the individual needs of the players. And as you can see, for Albert, obviously 1 is his love of learning, 2 being his curiosity, and 3 being his hope. And we said before, that's his values in action, but values in, if we want to say in a football context, is I know now as a coach, and Albert being part of our senior group, and obviously our leadership group, that understanding that he has a real love of learning now means me as a coach, I can go to him for feedback when it comes to maybe something tactically that we want to look at differently, maybe a different routine, a different way that to train, or something new to try. Straight away I know that Albert is someone that has got a keen love of learning. He's got a real curiosity behind that, and again individually he can be someone that kind of cultivates those ideas into into action for me. And as you can see there, if we want to use hope as a footballing, in a footballing context, always positive on the pitch when things are going bad, or we're in a bad moment, and generally using him as a player that we would look to bring on in latter stages of a game. if we look at Hope in that football context on the pitch, he's someone that's going to be, always looking forward, not thinking about the moment or the difficult moment that we find ourselves in, and obviously believing that we're going to get the right outcome before the end of the match. So a really good process, a really strong connection kind of process that's allowed me to establish a really strong living, breathing values and behaviors in our team this year, and something that again is we're just at the tip of the icebergs, so to speak. So again, if you wanted to look at that website, again, encourage you to go on and perhaps go through that own process, both for yourself and for your group as well. So again, if there's any more details that you'd like to know in the chat or in the questions, feel free to drive those at the end. But yeah, really great, really authentic, ties in perfectly with my own philosophy. Just before we move on, again, to go back and to kind of tie this section of my role as head coach, tying that in with the management aspect, that behavior element of the players, the values that we want to try and create is my role, or the way I see it as a head coach. And we spoke about those two ends of the spectrum. I firmly believe that respect fits nicely in between both of those things. And something that we spoke about a little bit earlier is creating that sense of safety within the group. And this is a nice little excerpt from the book written by Simon Sinek. If you've heard of him, again, if you're interested in leadership, his book on Leaders Eat Last is a fantastic insight into that. But as you can read there, and what the quote says around the sense of safety, the responsibility of a leader is to provide cover from above for the people who are working below. When the people feel that they have the control to do what's right, even if sometimes means breaking the rules, then they will more likely do the right thing. Courage comes from above. Our confidence to do what's right is determined by how trusted we feel by our leaders. And if I put that again in a football context, having, in terms of let's say the rule breaking, it's giving that players safety on the pitch, that whilst I have an idea, a way of playing, a real clear sense of philosophy, once the players get out on the pitch, it's them in their element, and my control is limited on the sideline, and creating an environment of safety where players can look to think outside the square, interpret situations differently, and go down routes and possible outcomes on the pitch that they think might be correct, giving them the confidence to be able to do that, and that trust element really starts by myself or yourself as a head coach. Having been in New Zealand since 2003, something that you can't get away from here, and something that's really binded into not just society, but also in the sporting context, is the Maori culture here, something that is really, again, really powerful, has a really strong connection with the Kiwi person, and a quote that, again, that really has resonated with me since I arrived here in New Zealand, Is this He Tangata Maori proverb, which obviously, as you can read there, is for them, for the Maori culture, the Maori people, the beliefs. When asked what is the most important thing in the world, I would reply that it's the people, it is the people, it is the people. So moving on to methodology, the final part of the presentation, and I guess something that obviously plays a large part, as a role of a head coach. In my own coaching philosophy, obviously having a real clear vision in my mind around how I see the game being played, how I want the team to present itself on the pitch, and the personality that I would like for them to have on the pitch. And something that I'll dig on a little bit deeper in this section is not necessarily focusing on the football actions themselves on the pitch, but actually looking at the interactions of the players on the pitch. For me, everything is driven by a playing statement. Again, this is my own playing statement, my own philosophy, and this always drives what training looks like, key elements that we want to see in a game, some key performance indicators in a game. And this is always, at the center of, how we want to look, act, and feel, on the pitch, as I touched on before, in the earlier slides. Again, I'm just being informed that there's a couple of technical difficulties, so just bear with me 1 second. I'll jump in and out. One moment. Hopefully that solves that issue a little bit. So again, as I said before, this playing statement is at the center of how we live and breathe. How we want the team to look, act, and feel on the pitch. Was this my playing statement or my philosophy 3, 4, 5 years ago? No. Is it something that's constantly evolving? Yes, and I think it needs to. It's something that has to evolve with the game, evolve with me as a person and my own beliefs, and obviously driven by the competition, the players, the people, and that culture that you're living in. As you saw before, a big key element of the playing philosophy is the positional play element, and it's essentially going back to that interaction of the players. It's that belief that even the smallest of direct or indirect movements or actions individually as players on the pitch has a big effect or consequence to certain elements within the team. So it's essentially looking the team as a living, breathing collective organism, and for me ties in very much strongly with as I touched on before, both my my own beliefs as a person, and obviously the way that we want to live our values and things as a group as well. The foundations of that positional play, and again, as I touched on at the start of the presentation, I think each of these sections could be a presentation in its own. But looking at the context or the foundations that that I've instilled into my own interpretation of the positional play. First and foremost is looking at the playing area, the pitch that the players are going into. Where possible, we are referencing these areas, these spaces, these channels, as I've got written here. And these reference points give a good gauge for the players to interpret certain movements or certain patterns and those interactions that I spoke about in certain areas. So again, the language that we use, the references that we use, and obviously the layout that's been touched on. You can see on the diagram there is something that we're making sure that the players understand. For me, the foundations of of my positional play is always looking to play out where possible from the back, creating with the aim of creating superiority when we are playing out from the back. So again, whether that's positional, in games we might find that we're in a position where we can build out cleanly with 2 versus 2 and we don't need the numerical advantage, or again certain spaces that we're getting good clean progression of the ball, we can be in a good positional superiority. Numerically, again, I'm sure everyone's very familiar of is creating options from our our play from the back, our build out movements in a way that including the goalkeeper as a key cornerstone of our deep build ups, that we have a numerical advantage. We've always got one more player than them in our build out to ensure good clean progression, and also a qualitative superiority in the initial phase of the build up. And again, not necessarily needing one more player, but again seeing that either our goalkeeper or our defender on a certain side or in a certain space or on a certain channel that you can see there, for whatever reason in the game, because of the way the opposition's set up, their qualities are allowing for them to drive out with the ball, find certain passing lines, and again go back to that clean progression of the ball. Again, obviously possession is something that's paramount. It's something that we want to have the ball. The ball is always a reference, but something that's always made absolutely clear to the players is we don't just have possession for the ball for the sake of having possession. And the reason that we do have the ball is because we want to manipulate, we want to unbalance the opposition lines, and through quality circulation and vertically playing through their lines, the team can travel up the pitch together. And for me, if we can get a clean vertical or diagonal progression of the ball in 1, 2 or 3 passes onto the next line cleanly, then that's something that I'm really encouraging our players to do. But the key element there is that as the ball travels up the pitch, the team stays connected, and again going back to that living connected organism. Something again that's specific for me is having players at different heights, having players obviously good spacing and coverage across those channels, but having players at those heights where they can manage distances between themselves, certain rotations, and again there's not necessarily specific ones, but horizontal and vertical rotations in certain zones and between certain lines of the pitch that we've obviously identified in our preparation in the opposition. And something that really important when it comes to progressing the ball cleanly through the lines. What I like to see is that superiority between and behind the opposition line of pressure. So, once we get that first clean progression of the ball, we're making sure we're in a quality position. Our players are, in a position whereby they can connect, they can combine, really aggressively and really quickly to, further disorganize the opposition defensive shape and obviously, get up to the opposition goal. And the attacking philosophy is first and foremost the desire and the hunger for the team to attack. Touching back to, well, if we want to attack in the right way, we've got to have possession and good possession. But I firmly believe we want the opposition defenders, we want the opposition goalkeeper sweating, and it's not putting a show on by seeing how long we can keep possession for. I want to dominate the game by constantly attacking, living in the opposition's half as long as possible, and ultimately the objective of the game is scoring goals. And this attacking philosophy and this mentality essentially dictates how the team also defends. Again, I'm not so sure that this video will play appropriately for the players, or if it might be for you guys, or it might be a little bit jumpy. So again, I might just have to share that, or get Stephen to share that with you guys after the presentation through a link. So we might just kind of jump on to the next slide. Looking more in terms of the training context, and again, obviously I've spoken about, well, the center of everything is the game. It's what we want to look like on the pitch in a match, what our personality is like. Obviously that is bred and driven on the training pitch. And again, I'm sure a quote that everyone is very, very familiar from Pep Guardiola is, essentially, you play at the rhythm that you train. And, that's something that, again, has really come to the forefront of my mind, that unless you are really driving, those standards and that rhythm, and going all the way back a few slides to that quote from Wayne Smith, regardless of the amount of contacts that you have, there's nothing stopping you, living those values and those standards. So, that's something that's definitely at the forefront of our mind. Again, it's a short video. I'll share this. Here's a little positional game, something that we work with the players, to give you a little bit of context, just without obviously playing the video in case it's frozen. But again, we will share this with you after. Is the playing statement is at the center of everything. The way that we want the blue here, who are the attackers, to play with the ball, how we want them to position themselves, that whilst the focus might be on obviously controlled possession, but here we're always looking to progress the ball cleanly into the next space. That's always alive and at the center of everything that we do. Again, every element of the game, both in possession and out of possession, has to be at the forefront. And the white team, albeit here, or the white group who are acting as the defenders, they have a role and a responsibility, and their pressing triggers and the way that they defend is the way that we would want to defend as a team. So again, the coaching and the interpretation is not just for the team, with the ball that we're focusing on, but obviously, for the defenders as well. If I look at now, obviously, what makes up the training, or what I call, what is the fabric of our training and what it looks like, is, as I kind of, touched on before, is, we heavily look at and heavily focus on, improving the interactions of the players. So orientation of their body, how they move in relation to others, good spacing on the pitch, how their movement has a direct consequence for someone else in their space or in their channel, in relation to what we're trying to achieve with the ball in that certain game against that certain opposition. Again, the reference is always the ball, as I touched on just before on that previous slide, and going back to that playing statement that, we always want to have the ball. We want to dominate the game and generate those superiority moments that we spoke about. And, that this is the only moment that we live in. So training is always based around the moment that we want to live in on the pitch, that is, reproducing our playing style and our playing philosophy. So sorry, those slides again. So again, really making sure that the center of everything is, those elements above. And, the last point that I'll bring up there is, something that, the way that we plan our tactical planning with the team is, not necessarily, breaking the game into parts, interpreting the game to the players, in isolated parts, and, in fact, actually seeing, the game of football, the way that we want to play football is just one moment. And again, tying that back to, our playing statement and our reference at the beginning, and the statement that you can see there at the bottom is, the way, I see the game, or the moments of the game is actually one moment, and that's a continuum of complexity. And to kind of give a little bit more context or background onto that, I was fortunate to spend a couple of days at La Masia in Barcelona with the then head of methodology, Joan Villabosch, who actually came out to New Zealand, where I first met him. Spent a couple of days there, and they obviously, he spoke about what they see at the club is the game, not necessarily in parts, but they see it as what they call a continuum of complexity. And as we can see from this quote here, in essence, it's, not dividing football into attacking and defending, but it's understanding that everything on the pitch depends on everything. And the way that, players can interpret that, the way we attack also will depend and manipulate, how we're going to defend in those moments, and having that kind of clear, thread and connection between, every moment of the game. And when we talk about, the team performance, or when we're talking about a continuum of complexity, and I want to give credit here to, Yanis Tsala here, who, beautifully demonstrates, I guess, what, that, what that continuum looks like. And, if you look across the three elements of the game, there's obviously the dynamic element, which we've spoken about, the laws of the game itself, being driven by, the ball, the opposition, your teammates and key spaces. There's obviously, your own strategy, or what I've said before, your playing statement, or your philosophy, your strategy for that game, which is, underpinned by principles, interactions, as I spoke about before, not necessarily actions in my, personal view, and obviously those relationships which are driven there. And then, one thing that obviously stands out in terms of, the way we want to look and feel and act on the pitch is that rhythm. And really, these three kind of key elements of optimizing, your team performance. You can see how all of those aspects, all of those principles are a consequence of one another. And, as as you dig deeper into your own principles or those interactions and those relationships on the pitch, you can really see those coming to the forefront. So yeah, again, look, apologies. I understand there's been a couple of technical difficulties there that Steve's just alerted me to, and I think my face has popped up a couple of times during that presentation. So apologies for that as well. But as Steve said, we will be sharing the presentation with you at the end, and again, we'll look to share whether it's built in to the presentation itself or if those videos are separate, and we'll make sure that that you guys are able to to access them.
Okay, thank you everybody, and as mentioned, thank you for your patience there with one or two of the technical difficulties. That's the beauty of recording live, and yeah, we certainly hope that you are still able to get a lot from it, and obviously across those 3 or 4 areas there that Jose's spoken about, I'm sure there'll be a number of things that will be applicable to you. So again, thank you for those that have stayed with us. We just got 1 or 2 questions, Jose, if that's okay.
Yep, all good. Yep, no problem.
So we've got one of the questions which talks specifically to the role of, in their words, like a mental performance coach. Do you have access to that level of provision at Auckland City, or is that typically something that you would address yourself?
Yeah, look, it's something I think I mentioned in the presentation earlier around those, the process of the values in action, or building that, that culture, and using Craig Lewis. So he's a high performance coach. He's also someone that's worked, at the High Performance Sport New Zealand in that role itself. And again, for my learning as a coach, how we can tap into that side, and having that kind of support to both upskill myself, but also to dig a little bit deeper for the players, and get a clear understanding on what drives the players, getting for them to understand themselves individually, and having not only myself as a coach available, but having someone like Craig available for players to talk to individually in those areas is been really key as part of our process.
Excellent. And one point that I'm really interested in that you mentioned quite early on in the talk was around being an amateur football nation, but yet you want to drive professional behaviours. What are some of the strategies that you use to help ensure that the players are aware of that stance also, and not just the coaches?
Look, it's something that I think the easiest way, or the most natural way, to bring that to life is, to be driven by those that are around the players, and that being myself as the head coach, the staff around me. There's obviously a lot of planning and a lot of upskilling that goes on for us as a group, as staff, in terms of what we want to act like, what our behaviours are like on the pitch, and really driving those standards as a group, and having that consistent message, not necessarily tactically or technically, but also, all of those individual elements as well, that our staff are, completely aligned, and, having a group such as, the leadership group to help drive those values has, been something that's, been really successful.
Excellent, excellent. I'm guessing that, that'll be a challenge for a lot of people listening that are working at, various stages of football in NZ in particular. And obviously for those friends as well that are in other nations that are maybe in the development phase of their national game as well. So, and there's some really good points. And I think on the whole, Jose, you've offered some really detailed insight into what you're doing. And certainly, having seen you work and know how you operate, this is a true reflection of who you are and the work that you put across at Auckland City. So I just want to thank you again for sharing this evening. I'm sure we'll see you again on future episodes of the Playing Field coming up. But certainly do appreciate your willingness, openness, and detail that you shared with us this evening.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks again, Steve. And yeah, as we said, I hope everyone was able to take something out of there. And again, if any issues or with some of the content, be sure that it will be shared with you guys. So thanks again.
Excellent. And then just lastly, to finish up, just want to encourage you all to kind of keep in touch when it comes to profiling of coaches in New Zealand. We're certainly doing our best to ensure that there's stories are being shared from people across the country. So again, if there are any additional pieces of feedback, then it'd be great to hear from you all. And then otherwise, please ensure that you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's plenty of stories on there for you now. Again, they're racking up the views, and that's really good to see. And again, we'd love to kind of take you along this journey with us and keep showcasing the likes of Jose and others that are in the country. So otherwise, thank you again for your time. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon on the side of the playing field. Thank you.